Okay, great. Okay, well, wonderful time to be here in Taipei. I think it makes a lot of sense to begin with a little introduction about each of us. Since we are in Taiwan, I'd love to start with the Congressman, Jason Shu, once we have these microphones turned on, of course. So, a little bit of an introduction about who you are and what you're excited about in the regulatory market. Jason Shu.
Can you put on my slides? I'll do the rest to
Sure.
to go on.
Well, in the meantime, David, we'd love to hear more about what you're doing with PinDX and your thoughts on just the regulatory climate.
Right. So my legal career has been kind of an interesting one, and I was in a traditional law firm and became a partner, and then I was at Microsoft, and after Microsoft, I got to sit on the governing board of the Ethereum Foundation, and that kind of opened this up. And so then I had this great opportunity to go into PinDX. And one of the reasons that it's so exciting is it's the same thing that drew me to China about 40 years ago. And so I was a lawyer, and China, when you talk about China and law together, people said, what are you talking about? There is no law there. And so it was a growing, exciting, cutting-edge place for lawyers to be, and it grew very quickly. And blockchain is the same kind of opportunity or challenge that certainly one finds in the regulatory environment. That it's one of those areas where the law is trying to catch up with what the reality is, and so that's why it makes it so exciting. And it's responded well. So I think Taiwan is the kind of the model. Because it has a supporter of the technology and what it brings within the government, and so that makes it a whole lot easier proposition. With other governments, you've got to have those use cases. You have to show how balancing the interests that they have is a safe thing to do, and a very exciting environment.
Yeah, we definitely have a lot of questions about how you're entering different markets and how the markets and regulatory frameworks or legislation is responding to it. Dimitri, would love to get a quick introduction about your project in Liberland? European Parliament. Excuse me, yes.
Well, our story in the European Parliament is more or less like a case of political entrepreneurship. Because we had to open the demand for blockchain regulatory framework in the European Union. European Parliament had a very wide range of problems to address because of the economic crisis we have in the European Union. And suddenly a very, very interesting field, blockchain, cryptocurrencies, ICOs, all together triggered us to open a window for this case. Roger, where are you going? I want to say that 1.5 years ago, Eva Kaili, my political advisor, and my political director had a meeting with a great guy like Roger Ver, who downloaded in her phone her e-wallet and started educating her about how Bitcoin actually works. After 6 months, we initiated our blockchain resolution in the European Parliament, and being a visionary with impact is a very, very big case in our world. Thank you, Roger, for that.
Let's go to the bathroom.
And Congressman Jason Shu, we'd love to hear a little bit more about what's wrapping up in Taiwan. Very exciting place.
Sure. I think this is an exciting moment. So I have something new to announce today, but before that, I'll talk a little bit about myself. So my background is in technology entrepreneurship. Before becoming a member of parliament, I was a tech entrepreneur. So when I become a politician, my friends joke that I joined the dark side. But I figure it's important for someone who can speak the language on both sides, who can speak the language of policy and who can understand the language of technology. So within Taiwan, I set up various industry associations. I champion a coalition for blockchain in the parliament. This is something that I said in the Davos this year in the World Economic Forum on a panel that I joined with Central European bankers and members of parliament from other European countries. And I said that security token offerings could revolutionize the entire global innovation system. And if you look at the world across different countries, you see how different countries are addressing the STO. It's really, coming after the whole craziness or the madness after ICO. We look at this industry from a fresh perspective. So how do we invite regulators to come in and to develop a responsible innovation framework? So I think that's something that's very important. So you can see by the UK, US, Hong Kong, and Thailand, they all have something ready to welcome this industry. So 2019, I call it the new era of STO. Literally, there's a cliff jumping of ICO for the last 12 months, and I see something like this would really weed out the bad actors and allow the responsible and conscientious good actors to play a role in this nascent industries. So you've seen quite a steep drop of the ICO in the last 12 months. So where we are at now is going from ICO to STO. The two keywords, one is governance and the other is industry development. It's really three things that are coming together and combined with the three characteristics that are making this a possible scenario for mainstream industries, for the old money to start embrace this new industry, for the financial institutions to start having a role, for the central government to start having a role in this. One is high liquidity, and the second is real asset. Now, cryptocurrency was attacked and criticized for the lack of physical backing, but with STO, then it gives the legitimate foundation for something like that to be regulated. And number three is governance. What is the role of the governance in this? Now, I talked about the opportunities for Taiwan. Now, I mentioned during my opening speech, we pioneered the blockchain regulations. We have the FinTech regulatory sandbox, and which I helped draft and pass in December 2017. And in June this year, we are coming out with STO regulations by FSC. And secondly, we are using this opportunity to attract global investments. We allow global citizens to invest in our STO projects, regardless of your nationality, regardless of your geographic locations and jurisdiction. And number three is industrial applications. We try to apply global technology in leading industries like fintech, medical, and biotech industries. We're setting up the National Center for Excellence for Blockchain, which would champion 6 areas for developing blockchain as a mainstream technology in medical, in agriculture, in finance, in intellectual property, in logistics, in IoT, and smart cities. So those are exciting things to really think about. And for the blockchain ecosystem in Taiwan, you can look at the slides here. We have a quite balanced spread over ecosystem on the incubation, application, infrastructure, venture capital, accelerators. We have government support and a regulatory framework ready for this, and obviously exchanges. Another opportunity Taiwan really sit on is the Taiwan's leading global IT industries. As you can tell, TSMC produces the ASIC chips that basically power the Bitcoin mining, and also NVIDIA was founded by a Taiwanese person. So we have a very strong position in the entire cryptocurrency ecosystem. So there is a lot that we can experiment and integrate here. And this is just a couple of illustrations of our blockchain startups that are using blockchain to trace the agriculture, food safety, and also another project that is launching the sovereign identity for Aboriginal tribes. So these are things that are quite unique and really also addressing the what we call a social economic importance of this industry. Now, lastly, I wanted just to spend a few more minutes to talk about the framework. This is probably the first time we share it in an international audience, so I hope this will get you excited. And we have a good version by the FSC, which is our Financial Supervisory Commission, but we have a best version by the Crypto Congressman. So here we go. On the left is our FSC framework, and it only allows professional investors to invest in STO. Professional meaning the institutional investors or anyone who has the asset over $1 million US. But my proposal, which is a more liberal and democratic proposal framework, is for institutional investors and professional investors, there's no limit, no cap limit to invest in a STO project. Since you already regulated this industry, why set a limit, right? And number two is the FSC's framework do not allow regular people to invest. You have to have $1 million in assets to participate for only 100,000 NT. So it's like, we want you to play, but you can't really play. So mine is to remove the restriction for the professional investor. So anyone in this country or abroad can invest in the STO project. And then on the other side, for STO, for the FSC framework, you have to have 100 million Taiwan dollars, which is 3 million USD, 3.3 million USD, to register as STO exchange. And then you have to have an operation margin in 300,000 US dollars. And my version is to relax restriction for the platform operators from 3 million US dollars to 1 million US dollars. This is why? Because we want more startups to come into this field, to stir up the entire industry, so that the opportunities can be offered to the startups. And then I want to introduce a trust system so that exchanges, when you work with the general public, or when you accept money from the general public, you have to have a bank that are endorse your trust system. So your operating money and investor money are separated. So these are two major things. And FSC's version is limited to someone who have a dealer license. But my version is both broker and dealer license could be platform operators. And for FSC's version, you have no price negotiations. But it is to the spirit of blockchain for the real-time settlement that I am allowing the exchanges to offer competitive pricing settlement for your investments. So that's what the major difference. And lastly, there's a 1 million cap for exemption. So for an STO project, if your issuance amount is capped at 1 million US dollars, which is 3000万台币, you're exempt from FSC. 不用回报金管会. But if your issuance is up to 1 million to 6 million US dollars, you have to apply into sandbox, which I feel is a pain in the butt. It's very, very difficult to process into the sandbox. It takes up to 6 months to process the sandbox. It's a waste of time and it's no efficiency. So mine is to increase the fundraising amount from 1 million to 5 million. Now, why I argue this? Because it's a sweet spot for Series A funding. Taiwan startups has what we call a Series A crunch. Our startups have problem raising beyond Series A. So I feel if we were to invest in this STO framework, we have to allow them to raise up to a Series A amount, which is 3 to 5 million US dollars. And then lastly is single platform versus multiple platform trading systems. So I'll stop here, but I think this is a quite elaborative thing that we will be doing. And I would love my colleagues from European Parliament to come and support this version as well. And what will go on in the next few months is there will be a competition between FSC's draft and the legislator's draft. So I want to mobilize all of your support in supporting crypto congressman draft, in making the STO game a real game for everyone to play. Would you say yes? Okay, thank you.
JT, thank you. That was really wonderful to hear that we have some great ideas that are being worked through into the Chinese and the overall Taiwanese government. I would love to hear more about what's going on in the European Union and your approach to regulatory and blockchain.
Well, as I told you before, it was a case of political entrepreneurship, because opening the demand for regulation in this vibrant field is not always very, very easy. We have interests that try to block and create frictions. Well, we had to communicate and, if I can say, educate the members of the European Parliament that blockchain is not just about Bitcoin and ICOs. It's not something that you can use to finance terrorist organizations, but it's much, much wider. Our blockchain resolution, which is the first draft report that was voted with the absolute support of all the members of the parliament, except one, was the blockchain resolution, and it seems that blockchain unifies Europe to some extent. Well, about regulatory approach, we have 3 principles. First, the innovation principle. You cannot over-regulate a technology which is still evolving and with uncertain impact. Second principle is technology neutrality. If you can make a payment with a paper money, you should not be prohibited to make a payment with another form. If you can deliver energy from one house to another through an energy grid by a company which is mainstream, you can also do it through Internet of Things infrastructure. And the third and most sensitive aspect and regulatory principle is the business model neutrality principle. It is up to the consumer to decide how he's going to use a banking service, for example. If he wants to use a fintech employing blockchain technology, it could be very, very easy for him to do, and it's not the regulator's approach to favor one business model over another. In our case, we are not focusing just about cryptocurrencies. We are talking about the energy sector, health sector, supply chain, education, transportation, creative industries and copyright, and of course financial institutions. We have a lot of challenges. We have data protection challenges, you know, of course, the GDPR, and GDPR is not blockchain. GDPR can change at any point. Technologies cannot change whenever we want, but if GDPR is not blockchain proof, we can change it. But practically speaking, GDPR is not a problem for blockchain. We can discuss it later if you want. So, smart contracts. Smart contracts is a very highly developed concept in IT technology communities, but in terms of legal enforcement, it's a completely different task. Operational challenges like interoperability, standardization, and scalability concerns us a lot. Cybersecurity challenges, and of course, the facilitation of technology transfer and mobilization of capital through ICOs. This is for the time being. We can discuss in more detail later.
Wonderful, yeah. So, sounds like the European Union wants to be a leader in blockchain technology and application development, just like Taiwan. What are some things that the European Union is doing to support and investment in this nascent growing technology?
I'm very proud on the 39th article of our blockchain resolution, which states that European Parliament gives the mandate to the European Commission to create a framework that will make European Union the global leader in the era of the second machine age. Well, we have recently launched a very interesting initiative called INATBA, International Association for Trust Blockchain Applications. Practically, it's a forum, but a forum with practical impact. We have certain concerns we want to address with this organization. You can find it in inatba.org. The first is about establishing a constructive dialogue between all those who work on blockchain. Our main aim here is to create a regulatory convergence around the world. The second very important aspect is about creating a governance model. We have established companies, big companies that already experiment with blockchain, but we also have startups. We have consumers, and all these people should align themselves around a blockchain ecosystem. The third aim of us is to create standards that will allow interoperability and scalability of the technology. And finally, to create a framework for industry-specific technological suggestions around DLT applications, tailor-made in energy sector, healthcare sector, and so on and so forth.
That's great. And David, I would love to hear a little bit more about your company's and organization's endeavors and some of the successes and perhaps inspirational stories that are coming about in 2019.
Well, I think the key word was convergence of a regulatory framework, and because when you're a company and you're operating globally, you kind of operate by triage. That some jurisdiction is going to raise an objection, and yet you could be operating the exact same way in another jurisdiction very smoothly. So to have some type of common understanding of how cryptocurrency and blockchain companies should be regulated would be hugely helpful, because we are a global environment. And when you're an industry like ours, like fintech, then there is, I think, around privacy, that seems to be something that is sort of converging internationally, that we have at least a very high Europe, and so if we can meet that standard, then we feel confident in other places. But in terms of other things, so I think one of the big issues that we've run into is that we have a complete understanding and an empathy that regulators need to balance the interests of investors, of individual citizens with technological development, and there has to be a good balance there. One of those issues that we've run into is that sometimes an investor, particularly in cryptocurrency, has unreasonable expectations. Everyone thinks, where's my car? I invested in this company and I want to be a millionaire and it's not happening. And so, that expectation has to be kind of like kept down to a point to where if that investor then complains to a regulatory authority that there's something problematic with a company, that can become an issue. And so there's this, the idea of blockchain companies being regulated is kind of oxymoronic, right? So I mean, the whole principle behind the development of blockchain was to be, decentralized and unregulated. And we can see that's not going to work at some level, right? Because after all, if that basic principle of decentralization is being, faced with governments who operate basically on centralization, there's going to be a irreconcilable conflict. And so, it's going to be interesting to see how it develops over the next few years. I think STOs present an interesting kind of challenge because there's already established in almost every jurisdiction, pretty complete regulations regarding securities. And so now you're kind of bringing in a blockchain technology, and we'll see how that all develops. But I think the best thing that happens is that there's dialogue, that there's open dialogue, between regulators and the industry, so that somehow we can find that sweet spot where the regulators' interests and their balancing of interests is met, and at the same time, innovative companies are allowed to, innovate as they want.
Great.
Let me make a brief comment, and thank you very much for what you say, because practically regulating a technology is, I will not say stupid, but it's a little bit difficult to do so. Technology neutrality concept was there to identify exactly this point. We don't want to regulate the technology. The uses, though, should be regulated with some standards in order to create legal certainty and legal trust around the concepts.
That kind of brings up something for Congressman Jason. My understanding is in Taiwan, they're going to be banning Uber, for example. What if there were some developers or startups that were to create a global decentralized Uber? How would the government, Chinese government, the Taiwanese government, or any government for that matter, that where Uber might be legal, how would they go about enforcing action if there's no one to shut down?
Again, this is the question of the disruptive technology versus antiquated regulations. And we try to regulate Uber in today's public road law, which was created 30 years ago. And 30 years ago, there wasn't internet or mobile devices that allow you to call rides from your phone. But today, our life is just simply cannot be separated from these devices and always connected online. So with something like this, I feel government must evolve with the technology and really embrace technology as a tool, not be terrified by it as a threat. I think a lot of times, when government think about technology, they think about IT systems. How many computers we should buy and how many servers we should rent. Even for the first time I mentioned blockchain in Taiwanese government, they say how many blocks we should buy. And it's something like this, that we need a whole new breed of public servants who can understand the friction and convergence, to quote your word, which is probably the most important thing that we are dealing with here, which is the disconnect from the law that was set up to regulate the old industry and with the reality that is dominated by the users and expectations of the market and the world. So perhaps that we need to engage a wider conversation with the industries, with the users, with academic, and really to look far beyond the horizon and look at laws not as the lowest common denominators, but look at it as an enabler. Look at it as something that you do to enable new industry, and also put a safeguards between some of the risks involved. So this is some challenges that we have to face.
Right, and I think it's important to remember that blockchain and DLT technology does not necessarily have to mean a cryptocurrency. It could just be a distributed ledger. I am curious though what like central banks would be thinking about cryptocurrencies in general these days. Maybe Dimitri, you have an opinion on this?
Well, if you ask me from news from the European Central Bank, we have no news. I know that the European Central Bank explores in its capacity as a supervisory authority for the banks of Europe applications with the Central Bank of Japan. But when it goes to creating a framework around cryptocurrencies, they are very, very conservative. And we had very passionate discussions in Brussels with officials of the European Central Bank. But sooner or later, we will address the problem of a crypto euro, because the nature of money changes, and sooner or later, in the era of the Internet of Things and smart contracts implementing as an infrastructure the Internet of Things, you need to have money possible to be encrypted and coded into a smart contract. And this cannot be delivered by paper money or just digital money. You need crypto money.
Great, great. And David, for your company's and organization's activities, where are you spending most of your focus these days, and what are the most interesting kind of challenges that you're facing from a legal point of view?
Right. Well, we're dream of all of, whether it's in blockchain or crypto, is to have mass adoption. And so that's what we look at, right? And so from our perspective, retail offers that opportunity. So we focus, with our current device that allows us to get into retail and allowing, common consumers to use cryptocurrency, to buy cryptocurrency from a retailer, to use that cryptocurrency. And so that's kind of like a general focus. And the question of where, well, Asia still presents the greatest growth opportunity in that area, where you have both the unbanked population, so areas in Indonesia and other places where they don't have credit cards, or they don't have relationships with banks, and therefore they don't have a credit history. Well, what we provide will give that opportunity to allow, regular people who don't have those relationships with banks be able to develop a traceable, transparent credit history. So, Asia is that big focus. Europe also is a really interesting place because it provides kind of the largest population with a consistent regulatory framework. And so, dealing with the EU has that huge potential. And so we're working on that, and that's a progressive area. The other area is in Latin America. And Latin America has that same, I think, tremendous growth potential that you find in Asia. Unfortunately, we kind of leave the US for last. It's certainly, on our radar. It is, what we're after ultimately. But from a number of perspectives, and regulatory is one of them, it's probably the most difficult nut to crack.
That makes a lot of sense. Jason, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, so Taiwan government is implementing a new ID system, which is called EID, electronic ID system, which is for the last 15 years, so this will be the first time we changed from a paper-based ID card to an electronic integrated IC system. And we are combining our social security data with our healthcare data. And Taiwan, if you don't know yet, we have the world's probably the best universal healthcare. So we have about 25 years worth of healthcare data. And data is really the new oil. And we try to build this new EID system on top of a blockchain backbone system, and which would allow us to do a lot of things based off these ideas. And it would also develop a cross-governmental, cross-departmental integrations to verify and authenticate your medical data and other type of data sets. So for example, after we issue this EID system, you won't go to a hospital and having to recheck in your medical data every time or get your blood testing again. So they will drastically reduce a lot of your time spent on this type of things. And we are also moving our what we call civil record on this EID system. For example, your exam record, your driver's license record, and a lot of things that we are doing to develop something like this. So we are still searching for a solution. We are actively calling for proposal. So if any of you here are interested in helping us build this system, please contact me.
Yeah, identity is incredibly important in blockchain. It does bring up some privacy questions. Of course, blockchain isn't normally used to store a bunch of data, but perhaps pointers, and maybe you could use this decentralized storage, or of course you might want to encrypt your data and then use the blockchain to access it or not. When you talk about like exam scores or your driving record, I'd imagine a lot of this should be verifiable, but perhaps not necessarily public, right? But I think it's really cutting edge that Taiwan, from a government level, is looking into basically decentralized identity. That actually ties into what you guys are talking about as far as like almost a universal credit history, like credit, like not credit report, but like a history of all your past transactions. If you don't have banking, you don't necessarily have that. You might have actually purchased a bunch of things, but you might not have a record of it, and therefore you might not be credit worthy. Right. Which is so that all kind of ties into one's identity. I would love to hear, Dimitri, your kind of predictions for 2019 and maybe 2020 for just how things will evolve in this space.
First and foremost, I would like to tell that we have the multi-annual financial framework, the 7-year budget plan for the European Union, which is designed to give 1.4 trillion euros in investments in infrastructure, innovation, small and medium enterprises, and investments on social impact. A huge amount of money out of this piece of budget is directed to blockchain technology, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things infrastructure, and this is the first step. The second is, from the regulatory perspective, is we expect to have from ESMA and European Commission a proposal on initial coin offerings. So far we had some initial recommendations that the European Parliament is not necessarily in the same line. In our blockchain resolution we spoke about ICOs as a distinct asset class, not a security, not a commodity. We try to avoid this trap, and we will have a lot of things to do in the 2 years to come. And also I would like to say that European Commission is going to get not just a part of the financial risk in developing blockchain applications, but also a part of operational risk, because European Commission already experiments with significantly big projects on blockchain and envisions to transfer this knowledge in the member states level.
Got Got it. And what do you guys feel that the market's going to look like as far as being able to trade in STO tokens? Say, is that going to be 2 years from now? Maybe in Taiwan a little bit sooner? What are your kind of feeling of where the kind of climate is right now in terms of being able to suppose that you are an accredited investor, but to be able to trade a normally illiquid asset on an exchange, is this going to happen pretty soon, or are we going to wait a couple of years? What are your opinions on this?
I suspect that the initial proposal of the Commission will include secondary market provision on this aspect. However, the danger I found out the course of the time is not how to trade ICOs, but how to include ICOs in your balance sheet. IFRS, accounting standards. The IFRS proposal was to include the proceedings from ICOs into the liability side, which means that if you are a startup starting with a seed capital coming from ICO, wanting to go to a Series B, you start by having a huge liability in your books and you go nowhere. Let's see the practical thing, the practical implications of where ICO proceedings go in your balance sheet, and how to trade tokens is a very important thing, but it's the next step.
Makes sense, makes sense. I think that if people are going to continue down the ICO or initial security token offering, you might want to kind of self-govern, meaning instead of getting all the funds up front, to have milestone-based, basically clearance of the invested funds. I think individuals, if you're going to do this, it's better for the ecosystem to do it in this kind of, have this built-in decentralized governance and milestone-based funding. I think that also if you were to ever get into, questioned by the SEC or anything like this, you can have, hey, listen, we did what we could do based off of the lack of regulatory clarity, and I think personally it's a very interesting kind of era we're moving into. It's going to be very dynamic. I do have one other question I wanted to ask you personally because of your kind of experience intersection between AI and blockchain. We hear this, but my question is, like, what does that actually kind of like mean? What are the implications of kind of controlling AI through blockchain, or what does this mean in your opinion, or do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I have no clear answer about it. My member of the European Parliament worked on both the files, blockchain and artificial intelligence, and I know that European Investment Bank invests on projects that combine the two technologies. I don't think that it's a completely different ecosystem. We all work together on this, and they develop in parallel. In technological terms, I leave the technology experts to work on this kind of issues. I cannot comment, and I have not the expertise about it. What I know for sure is that we have challenges coming from the quantum computing. But it's a completely different story here.
Yeah, I mean, quantum computing, of course, the good news is this: as long as one entity doesn't have quantum computing alone, then it'll be quantum encryption versus quantum computing. So hopefully things will balance out. That's why it's important to have many different organizations working on this. And that goes to say with blockchain and the, just in general, the more minds on it, the better. So we definitely appreciate everything you guys are doing to make it more of a kind of safer environment to be working in, and as far as a financial point of view. And David, I think that your company's mission of trying to bring crypto and blockchain to the world, and it is a really great one, and we wish you the best of luck. Since we are in Taiwan, I would like to give Jason Shu the last word if he has anything to say.
Yeah, I think today's blockchain ecosystem requires a concerted effort to really, bring real world use case to the blockchain space. From the government perspective, from the regulator's point of view, we want to divert as much as possible from the risks that are involved in some of the potential scams that are happening during the ICO craziness. So we will encourage you to develop real use cases that solve the problems we face today using the blockchain technology. And secondly, we should promulgate the blockchain as a lifestyle. Right now, you can't really feel any difference if blockchain doesn't exist in the world. Certainly, I think that's the problem. And obviously, this is a solution begging for problems. So if we could somehow develop crypto as a payment tool that we use on our daily life or through your payment system, that we can enable small merchants to start accepting them, and even for school system to start experimenting some of the tuition system based on the blockchain and crypto, then I think we will be looking far enough to the future, and especially our children who are born into this digital age, who practically, grow up with this type of thinking. Our government won't be too far away from really connected with its people. So I think that's the challenge of what we have right now. Yes.
Well, thank you guys so much for your time. That's it for the session.
Thank you.